is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. A few months back, I got an email from chocolate enthusiast Lauren Lowe. She'd recently attended the Northwest Chocolate Festival and had enjoyed hearing from Nick Davis of One One Cacao, a craft chocolate maker in Jamaica. She suggested I reach out to him about an interview, and I did exactly that, and I'm glad I did. Thanks, Lauren. Nick makes chocolate on the northeast coast of Jamaica in view of the ocean. It's a beautiful setting, and as we spoke over Zoom, I couldn't help but keep glancing behind him at the scenic view and wondering how that natural beauty makes its way into his chocolate. During our conversation, Nick shares his thoughts on the good and bad of inclusions, the challenges and opportunities in Jamaican cacao and chocolate, the historical and modern impacts of colonialism on both, and how making chocolate has allowed him to reclaim some of his family's story and power that had been taken by that colonial harm. I'm so grateful to Nick for his time and his insights, and I think you're going to enjoy this conversation as well. Nick, tell us a little bit about One One Cacao and how your company got started.
I started the business, and it wasn't actually a business. I think, like many people, it started out as a hobby, which sort of ran amok. I think that's the best way to describe it. So I had been a journalist for the BBC for many years. I was based in the Caribbean, and I sort of did a little trip back to the UK. And I remember seeing on a supermarket shelf a bar from the Grenada Chocolate Company. And I was like, that's amazing. That's my patch, based in Jamaica, but literally the whole region was where I was trying to look for stories. And I was like, I really need to check out what's going on there, because I didn't even know that cacao came from the region. I just assumed that they were bringing beans in as makers all over the world do. And I was like, well, cocoa's from West Africa. Like, literally, that was my belief. That was my understanding. So you can be, well, this is like early craft chocolate. So you won't be surprised at all that when I rang the number from the bar I bought, I went straight through to Mott Green. Now, for many people, they won't know who Mott was, but he was a transplanted New Yorker who ended up in Grenada, and alongside another couple of people founded a Grenada Chocolate Company, which was really one of the first tree-to-bar companies. And he picked up the phone and was immediately super gruff and challenging. Right? He's like, what do you want to know? Why do you want to know? What are you doing? You're based in Jamaica. Are you going to take our ideas? And but the more I realized he was completely the wrong person for the story I was working on, right? Like, he would have made terrible telly. And actually, I did a story on beekeeping and sustainable tourism when I went to film there. But he really did inspire me. It's one of those conversations which kind of, by the end of the conversation, he charmed me by his passion. And what was really, really transparent was how much he cared about the farm and the farmers and what happens during that process, and how so much of a value is lost from the people who are at the heart of craft chocolate. And at the end of the conversation, two things stuck in my head. One was that a lot of equipment which he bought had come from Jamaica. And I was like, so we have cocoa? Like, yeah, of course we do. Number one. And number two was that, he challenged me to make chocolate. Inadvertently, I was like, this is such a great idea. My parents had come from rural backgrounds here in Jamaica. I didn't know how much cocoa had played a role in my own family history. And I knew about cane. My dad came from a cane cutting community, and the reason he left to go to the UK was because he didn't want to be in that. He saw it as backbreaking slavery era work, and to be fair, it still is. And so that's the reason why he got the hell out of Dodge when he was able to. But it was only when I started making chocolate and my mum was saying, you need to go and visit your auntie. And I'm like, uh, why? What's she got to do? And she's like, yeah, family are from a place called Cocoa Ridge. Cocoa's been in our family since like as long as Jamaica has had and been holding people enslaved on the island. So, you know, you need to go back in time to find out more about your connections to cocoa. And that's really been a guiding principle for me and my business ever since.
And had you had any idea before that that your family had been working in cocoa previously?
Zero, zero. I mean, the interesting thing about people from the islands is you leave because there's nothing. You know, the vast majority of Jamaicans who stay have something. You know, it really is that simple. You know, the manic underfunding which existed in these nations after slavery ended. You know, when you talk about extracting value from societies under colonialism, the Caribbean is a great example, right? They literally worked for people and worked for soil to a point when both were totally unproductive, and then they left nothing, zero, nada. And so for generations there was such poverty that as soon as you were able, you got off the island to try and make a better life for yourself. And it was never spoken of again because the connections to slavery, to enslavement, was so strong in people's minds that the opportunity to, in the case of my mum, become a nurse, forget about what happened over there. That's in the past. My dad become an engineer, and even if you look at a lot of the adverts for progress in the Caribbean around that time, it was about industrialization. So to get a job where people were working in industry was progress. And so my parents went and they did that, and it barely spoken of again.
Mm.
But interesting enough, me getting involved in cocoa has been the thing which has made them both most proud, because it's sort of this cycle of actually now being able to add value to a thing where no value existed previously.
And do it on your own terms.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And when was it that you were becoming aware of all this?
So I had the conversation with Mott in 2013. I got my first cocoa beans in about 2014, 2015. Because the sad irony, it's not irony at all, but the sad thing which struck me was I got some cocoa beans from a lady who worked for us as a cleaner. I was like, do you know where we can get cocoa beans from? And she's like, yeah, I know someone in Portland, which is interestingly a parish which has some of the best cocoa in Jamaica, easily.
Hmm.
So it was pure luck. And they were well fermented. And she got some beans from someone she knew who traveled in to Kingston.
Hmm.
And we roasted a batch. I've got a picture of like a little baking sheet, roasted the beans. I read an Indestructibles. I'm not sure if you remember that. It was like an early sort of how to, even before, well, around about the same time as Chocolate Alchemist, but not as involved. It was like the first Google search you'd find.
Okay.
How to make chocolate. And literally it was like a blade grinder, coffee blade grinder, roasted nibs, put them in there, and you'd have chocolate. And of course it didn't. And then I think I read Chocolate Alchemy that you have to use a proper pestle and mortar. And it came out, I added sugar to it, and it tasted amazing. So I think the following day I tried to ring Mott and couldn't get hold of him. And then I went on the internet and found out he passed away.
Oh, wow.
And that was like, damn it. I and that's, again, that's been something which has really been instructive in terms of how I do business and how I have tried to run my business ever since. Grade has been a really important part of my journey. So that was probably 2015, 2016, I started the company One One Cacao, based off the Jamaican proverb, which is one cocoa, full basket, which means little by little you achieve your goals, little by little you fill your basket with a pod, with a bean, etc., etc.
Now, I understand you do have a background with coffee prior to this, right?
Yeah, that's right. My first job was at Blockbuster, working one of their video shops, and I hated it. And my second job was at a then new to the country, I guess you'd call it first wave coffee. Would you call it first wave? I don't know, but this is like early 90s, maybe
Sure.
second wave.
Probably second. Yeah.
Yeah, second wave coffee shop. And this place was such a complete blatant knockoff of Starbucks. The branding, it had the same branding as Starbucks, but with a different name. And it was called McCoy's. And it was opened by a Canadian family who
Please tell
moved
me you
to.
have like t-shirts or something that
I
have that on
don't,
it.
I don't have any merch. I don't have any merch, but they actually sold it. They sold, I don't know how they managed to get away with it. They sold it to Costa Coffee, which is one of the big coffee companies in the UK. So we were roasting coffee in like 93. And this was me as a 21-year-old at that point, going in the mornings and sort of bagging up like this, like, 12-kilo roaster alongside the owner, and we were getting beans in from Ethiopia, we were getting Costa Rica, some really interesting, for back in the day, Costa Rica in particular, places, and doing batch roasting, unheard of. And it's a skill which I still use. I mean, I still use some of those principles now in terms of how I roast cacao, and especially in terms of like flavor development. So yeah, it was a really useful time. And actually, I wish I'd been more. I wish I'd paid more attention, because I mean, my life would have gone in a different direction. And you got to follow your passions. I personally think coffee at the moment is way more complicated than what chocolate making is. I don't even think they're in the same general area. They're not in the same state.
On the technical side, you mean?
From a technical point of view, not even in the same state, maybe not even in the same country, in terms of how far down the road they are in terms of understanding. I'm sure big chocolate is probably at the same level, but for us people, if you speak to an average roaster in any state, any city, who's now in fifth wave or whatever, that, I think craft chocolate is barely into our first wave. So we've got a long way to go.
I'm curious, having had that background, what do you feel like the next steps are that chocolate could learn from the path coffee has taken?
Farming. I genuinely think that we need to go backwards to go forwards. I think we need to get more involved with the farm and the farmers. I don't think we realize it, but we are going down a route which has been well trod by colonialism within craft chocolate. We talk about farmer partners, but we don't really care about farmer partners. We don't really care about origins. We care about the beans. And even the language which is used, we pay our farmers more because of how they treat their beans. The rest of the farmers, we don't give a monkeys about. They could starve as far as we're concerned. I'm happy with the people I work with and the origin I work with, and them producing reliable beans. But outside of that, it means nothing to me. That's still exploitative, And I think we need to, if we genuinely care, we need to figure out a better way of being able to join up the dots. And I've spoken about it before. I think that collaborations between origin countries, and I hated the term origin for a long time because I still think it smacks of this sort of them and us, and going to origin and walking with the natives and seeing how they live their lives. It makes me a bit uncomfortable still, right? But for want of a better word, I guess it's something. It's just, as I said, the meaning behind it. But we need to figure out a better way, because even at the moment, I was at a fair recently, and someone was Martin Christie from the International Chocolate Awards said something really interesting at Jacoa, and that was some of the best chocolate in the world is being produced in these producing countries. It's being made in these because, as I've always said, they have the beans. They're the ones who are able to run the fermentations. They're the ones who are able to get, for national competitions, for a lot of these cacao of excellence, you must have some amazing chocolate, right? Amazing chocolate, but you're never going to taste it. What you're going to taste is the well-packaged, well-distributed chocolate from makers who have no connection to those countries, right? I mean, imagine if that was a situation with wine, or if that was a situation with beer. I mean, like that means unless, yeah, it doesn't work. And it fits in and it feeds into that same exploitative model. I'm going off on one for a second, but it's really important, and I think it's a point which is often missed. Okay, ice cream, gelato, right? There's nothing which would stop someone anywhere in the world making amazing gelato. But if you say it's an Italian making amazing gelato, yeah, of course, I mean that's a connection. Sure. Or wine, from Spain or from France. Think about the struggle it took for New World wines to get the prominence they have. We're in that same situation, but the problem is it never changes for people in our countries. And I say our countries with people of color. Mm-hmm. We're great to grow the raw material, but for some reason not good enough to be able to get our products into the main markets. It's a fundamental flaw in chocolate, fundamental, and we should know better.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bono Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half-pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers. What are the next steps to head in that direction? I mean, it's such a big problem. What are the action items to make that change?
Partnerships. Partner with, people talk about how difficult it is to do direct trade, right? Is it? I mean, like literally, you can be on the other side of the world and have a conversation in real time with video and audio, which is broadcast quality, and you're telling me that direct trade is difficult? Not really. There's loads of makers who are doing it. And I think that for me, that's the next level. People need to take the idea of direct trade seriously. And if you want to partner with people, the biggest issue which we have in origin countries being able to distribute is being able to get our product from one physical location to another. But, it requires significant financial capital to be able to do that effectively without losing either all your stock or literally even being able to pay for the excess luggage to carry your chocolates up on a plane. That's not easy for people to do. Language difficulties, I get all of that. But if you're able to get beans from a random port from one part of the world to another, you can get chocolate. And I think being able to put your chocolate, one of my favorite examples of that was actually Dandelion and Tuta and Juliana, and I'm going to totally slaughter the name of their company, Bayana Chocolate, and the fact that Dandelion were using the beans from their estate in their chocolate and also selling the same chocolate. And I think that Bean to Bar Brazil have been very efficient at doing that because they have great international connections. I would love to see more of that sort of collaboration happening. And I'm seeing it on a small level with myself, and I think it's with the Exeter Chocolate Festival and some of the makers in the UK. But I'm in a privileged position as well, right? I have one foot in and one foot out. I would like to see more of these collaborations happening in more different ways with different makers, and hopefully seeing more of a push within Bean to Bar makers to try and figure a way to be able to make that a reality. Because otherwise, we're not going to move the needle. We've been saying the same thing for the better part of nearly 2 decades. You know, beans bar chocolate, treated bar chocolate, made with finest beans. We only use 2 ingredients. Now, because 2 ingredients hasn't worked, we're just becoming glorified candy. You know, I don't care what anybody says, and I appreciate that the customer is always right. But by the customer being always right and us moving towards more, you know, highfalutin flavors to sell our chocolate, it's demeaning the work of the farmer.
Are you
And again,
opposed
that gets us,
to
yeah.
inclusion chocolate?
I'm not. I love great inclusion chocolate. What I fear is that you can use substandard beans to make great inclusion chocolate, and by doing that, people can get away. I mean, there's a lot of shady stuff which happens already, right? But you can get away with even more shady stuff if you're doing blends and you know, yeah, it's not good. I think it's not good.
Let's talk a little bit about your beans there in Jamaica. How are you sourcing your beans that you're using in your chocolate?
So it's a combination of methods. When I first started out, it was a nightmare because the only beans which were available to us were the beans which came through the government. So for years, as a way of being able to standardize and to guarantee quality, the only buyer of Jamaican cocoa was the Jamaican government. So you couldn't get beans any other way. You couldn't sell beans to anybody. You couldn't buy. The only person was the Jamaican government. That changed about 2016. And so we were able to then start going around and being able to purchase wet beans directly. But again, not many of us have drying facilities. So what we have to do is create connections with farmer groups, with farmers, with larger farmers to be able to buy beans. And that's what we do. So we go around in my little Land Rover. I pick up wet beans in big igloos and then carry them over to a fermentation center, centralized fermentation. And our kind of speciality is, despite Jamaica being about 180 by around about 60 miles wide in its longest and widest point, terroir is at the heart of what I do. So the beans which come from the farms in St. Mary have a very distinct and different flavor to the ones which come, let's say, from the far west, or the ones which come from not far from here in Kingston, in St. Andrew. Jamaica's 80% mountainous, and so because of that, we have some really great microclimates for growing. We've got some really different growing soil types. And as I said, you know, basically, we were a large market garden for about 400 years of our existence. This is a great place to grow things. So that's our thing. My thing is, I am constantly amazed by how this country produces amazing flavored cocoa everywhere. And because of the history, you know, of getting cocoa introduced by the indigenous peoples originally, by the Taino, you know, pre-Columbian, having cacao introduced by the Spanish during their couple of hundred years of occupation, and then by the English doing the same thing. It is an absolute, it's a hodgepodge of different cocoas, which I think make for some really interesting flavors.
Are you using entirely Jamaican cacao, or are you bringing in
Yeah,
any?
only Jamaican cacao. It's going to be interesting if we have any kind of big storm in terms of our resilience, because I mean that's a real deal, right? You know, I mean, if in our countries, if we have a hurricane come through, you know, that would be us out of business. That would be us out of business. But legally, it's we can bring in beans, but it's a challenge. But I do know that it's something which I will have to look at, and I know that other chocolate makers on the island are looking at the fact that we will probably have to source alternative beans. And also, you know, there's a much bigger issue for Jamaican cocoa, which is we don't have a lot of cocoa. Historically, we're one of the biggest producers of cocoa in the region. I would say now we're actually probably close to one of the smallest.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, my book on pairing craft beer and craft chocolate is available now on Amazon and on the Bean to Barstool shop. Pairing Beer and Chocolate, a guide to bringing the flavors of craft beer and craft chocolate together, is out now. This paperback book explains the process of pairing beer and chocolate, includes a guide to hosting a pairing at home, walks through dozens of beer styles to provide style-by-style pairing guidance, and gives room for taking your own pairing notes along the way. This is the only book on pairing beer and chocolate available. Grab your copy now at the link in the show notes or on Amazon. If you manage a tap room, bookstore, chocolate shop, or cafe and want to stock the book, get in touch about our easy wholesale process. Beer and chocolate belong together, and this book is your guide to getting the most out of every pairing. What are some of the challenges that you faced in trying to switch farmers over from having one centralized buyer to now working with a small maker like you?
Oh, they love it. I mean, we pay way better. I mean, like way, way, way better. The problem is it's not necessarily the farmer. It's the fact that they need help. You know, to be able to pick cocoa, it's back-breaking work, and it's long work, and it's tiresome work. It's slavery work. You know, you wouldn't do it if you had a choice. You know, so now getting people to work alongside them is a real challenge. You know, they may have cocoa, and a lot of this is almost legacy cocoa in Jamaica. We've not had an effective planting program for many, many years. That's something which, you know, I know that I'm trying to do, and some of the other chocolate makers on the island are trying to do as well, is getting more nurseries up in place and, you know, trying to get clonal propagation going. It's hard, you know, but getting people to actually physically go out there and pick during the cocoa season, that's our biggest struggle, because, you know, nobody wants to be rural poor. You know, I mean, urban poor is bad enough, but rural poor is like terrible. You know, I mean, it's terrible. You know, people want opportunity, and especially in countries like Jamaica, where, you know, there's, you know, people who have money, right? You see that. You know, I mean, it's difficult seeing people come in to the countryside to go hiking in Range Rovers if literally all you have is a little 50cc motorbike, or if that, you know, that's something. People move to the city, or people emigrate. You know, the average age of our cocoa farmers in Jamaica is, I believe, about 67 and a half. So it's older than the average globally. We've got climate change, we've got old trees. There's a lot of challenges. Cocoa is not for the faint-hearted in origin countries.
What do you think is the future of that in Jamaica? Is that sustainable?
Honestly, it pains me to say it, but we need to go big farms, man. I for a long time I've been fighting against it, but I don't see how we can make it sustainable. We're losing farmers every season. You know, they're dying. We have disease here. I mean, I'm sounding all very pessimistic. This is just like an average day in the life of like an origin person, right? You know, it is hard. Mm-hmm. It's a hard life doing cocoa in country, unless you've got a lot of money behind you. And even then, the ability to be able to lose a lot of money in cocoa is high too, right? So yeah, I think that we need to go big farmers. We need to get government subsidy to a certain extent to kind of keep us going, especially the farmers rather than the chocolate makers. But the chocolate makers here, we're the ones who are doing a lot of the pushing, but we don't have any political backative. It's a very Jamaican term. We don't have the weight behind us financially or politically to be able to force that agriculture needs to be a key part of the future of the island. Historically, a lot of this, again, it feeds into the fact that, you know, people see agriculture as being part of Jamaica's past. You know, everything is about services. And it's not just here, it's everywhere, right? You know, people don't want to be farmers. People need to eat, but they don't want to know where their food comes from. It's the same thing here in Jamaica. But, you know, unfortunately, we feel the shocks way more. You know, COVID-19 kind of brought that home. But now, you know, everybody's forgotten about what happened in 2020, in 2021, in 2022. You know, that was in the past, but it wasn't. It's right here, it's present, and we are going to feel the impacts of this again.
What gives you hope or makes you excited about this industry in Jamaica?
Every time I make a batch of chocolate, it's really that simple. I mean, I don't know whether or not they add crack into chocolate, right? But there is something about the process, right? It is so addictive. The thrill you get when you ferment from a new location and it looks like it's going well, and you get that first batch from the fermentary. The old guy I work with sort of bags it up and he's like, scraping the beans off the drying bed, and you smell them and they just smell amazing, and you take them back and you put them into the machine and you sort of roast them, and as it comes out you just get that really, you just know that there's some really interesting complex things going into your nose, and you're just like, yeah, this is good. And then you get it into the grinder and you're like, some volatiles coming off this bad boy. And then like, as it's just addictive. It's just mesmerizing, and that transformation. And then each time you test as you're going through, it's just the best feeling. And then obviously when it goes wrong, it's the worst, right? When it's under fermented and you're like, oh, this could have been so good. And remember with cocoa, each time you do a ferment is an experiment almost, right? With what's going on in those particular set of days and those particular. So when it goes right, it's amazing. When it goes wrong, it's depressing. But that's the way life is, right? And don't ever forget it. It's ups and downs. And you just have to roll with the downs because there's going to be an up.
I know this is going to depend so much on fermentation and other post harvest processing, but are there any common flavor descriptors that you would assign to Jamaican cacao that would be recognizable in the finished chocolate?
No, none whatsoever. Absolutely. It goes from smoky, caramelly, stone fruits, ripe tropical fruits. There's a really interesting thing which has been done by Sarah Baraf in Trinidad. She's been working a lot with the ITC here in Jamaica, the International Trade Center, to work on developing our cocoa. As I said, we've got a lot of challenges, right? And we're on the brink, but hopefully, the support of the chocolate community, the support of, agencies like this is going to make a difference. And she took a test batch, and the chocolate which has been produced between myself and another maker are so different. I mean, it's even with known entity chocolate tasting uber chocolate gods, they're like blown away by how different the cacao tastes. And I said, I often think it's about the beans, it's about the maker. Amazing things can come out between the beans and between the roaster and between the maker. All of these things play such an important role. So honestly, for a long time, I've been like, in terms of like location, I noticed with certain places, because of the techniques used, like especially in South Pacific cocos, I can very, very quickly tell. Madagascar, I can tell. But a lot of other places, actually Venezuela, yeah, I can tell as well. But like the Caribbean, I think because so much has gone into the mix, it's very difficult to be able to isolate it for me. Maybe I just need to do more sensory work.
Well, I know you mentioned this on your website, and I can see a little bit behind you on camera, but you're in quite a beautiful location. You're right by the seashore. Describe a little bit of your surroundings and how that possibly impacts your creative mindset or process in chocolate making.
Yeah, so we're on Jamaica's northeast coastline, a little place called Arocabesta. It was a key port during the time of green gold, the banana explosion, when bananas were coming up from Boston, between Jamaica and Boston, and making Lorenzo Dow a very rich man, and with various fruit companies which came out of the region at that time. It's gorgeous. Literally from where we are, we can see former home of Ian Fleming, who was the guy who wrote the Bond books. He was based out of here shortly after the Second World War. It's a marine park. It is pretty flat, blue seas. I don't know how to say it. I'm very blessed that I have this as a working environment. When my parents retired, this is where they chose as a spot. to move to for my dad to live out his final years, and it's where I'm based. We're actually looking to move more inland very soon to be closer to where we're doing all of our important work. But in the meantime, we'll always have this. This will always be where a lot of the inspiration comes from. There's moments of downtime in chocolate, and it's quite reflective, I find. The whole process from roasting through to watching 3 or 5 roll mill, watching that come through, or just watching the cocoa just going around in like a melanger. It's there's moments of being able to be quite meditative, and I enjoy it.
I feel like anything that keeps you rooted in your senses like that is any process that's going to continually give you input from your senses that maybe you're not used to paying attention to is going to do that.
Oh, it's lovely. And as I said, the legal name of my business is Temper Tantrum Limited, born out of the nightmare of finding a word. Apparently, if one company has the word cacao or cocoa in it, it can't be replicated. So I couldn't go with One One Cacao because there was another company which had used something not even slightly similar, but it used the word cocoa. And so I was so infuriated and getting annoyed, and I was so tired of trying to temper when I first started in this like tropical environment that Temper Tantrum seemed like the perfect name. I have to shout out Dr. Kerry Beale at this point in time for inventing the Easy Temper. She is, I think, one of the most important people in craft chocolate, and people forget her invention of the Easy Temper was what has been so influential for craft chocolate. It was hacked by John Nancy. I'm not going to get into the politics of that, right? But if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have a business. And even though I've been able to expand and get continuous tempering machines, it is probably one of the best investments I ever made in my business, getting an Easy Temper. Alongside getting, we spoke about John Nancy, the Winnower. Really brilliant machine. Like, does what it says on the tin. Those are the things which have been really important. I think most people have got the machines they need. What we need to do is we need to educate people in terms of the importance of chocolate. It's not about the taste anymore. Like, everybody knows it tastes better. It doesn't take a genius to work that bit out. And as I said, we've been saying the message for long enough, but obviously we haven't been saying it in the right way. Something is fundamentally missing at the moment. Why craft chocolate isn't where it should be. And once we get that, I likened it the other day as to like the Romans built the roads, but it was Henry Ford who got us the motor car and popularized, mass transportation for individuals. I feel that we're a ways away from that, but that's where we need to get to. And I think it's education. I think we're missing a trick in education. And I think that's what's going to get us over. Because education should be marketing. Yeah, I think it should be marketing. And again, I think that's where origin plays a really big role. I think if, what a lot of origin countries have is people. People come to us because we have sunshine and you guys don't. And so that's where the two things can align. So as I said, it's more than just getting your beans. It's about developing relationships with countries in origin, makers in origin, farmers in origin. That's cool. But I think that's where we can work together and make some really interesting things happen.
Earlier, you mentioned a little discomfort around inclusions, but have you had the opportunity to work with any local ingredients at all in your chocolate?
I do. I mean, it's an old one, but a good one. I love really good chocolate with coffee in. I say it very carefully because you can very easily like mess it up. But I love taking our famous Blue Mountain coffee and roasting it the way it should be roasted. Interesting enough, Jamaicans love coffee, but they love dark roast. Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee is a wonderfully delicately roasted coffee. When you add a wonderful delicately roasted coffee, high in floral and fruit flavors to chocolate, it is a wonderful and amazing combination. So I love that sort of thing. What I don't like is just adding inclusions in because, people want to try soursop, or they want to try Neesbury, or they want to try some things are not meant to go together. And and if I'm just throwing them in because you're like, oh, I wonder what this tropical chocolate with a tropical fruit tastes like. No, 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 no. It's no. I liken it to my partner in life and business is from Spain, from Barcelona. I need to be very, very correct about that. She's Catalan, and they do this thing called, and I'm going to totally mess it up, calimocho. I think that's what it's. It's this combination of red wine and Coca-Cola. It's what kids drink when they want to get drunk at an early age, because it's kind of like taking something which is palatable for them and then mixing it with something which is going to get them absolutely loaded, right? But it's like their gateway drug for drinking. Mm-hmm. But it's a terrible combination.
It sounds terrible.
It's terrible. Why would you do that? And that's kind of what I feel that we've got to be very careful that we're not heading into territory-wise with inclusion chocolate. Just because it sells, that's a weird thing to say when someone runs a business. Just because it sells doesn't mean that you should necessarily always sell it. And I think that there's plenty of space for inclusion people. And yeah, my business may suffer, but I right now, I think I need to do. And this is my work. This is my work at the moment, and that's kind of developing and kind of helping to hopefully keep on life support local cocoa. That's my plan. That's my plan.
What story are you telling with One One?
It's interesting. I found my business plan from a few years ago, and the business plan was like, I'm here to help sustain and develop the local cocoa industry, and hopefully I'll be able to make some money along the way. Yeah, it's really hard. So I think what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give my family enough for us to be able to live comfortably on, to be able to help the people who have helped us. I'm really loyal as a person, and the people who've been loyal to me, I will go to bat for them day in, day out. So I want to show loyalty. I want to show responsibility. I want to have some sort of stewardship towards the environment which we live in. Again, this goes back to our history for a moment. Land has been always very important in Jamaica. It was important for growing sugar. It's important for growing cocoa. But now land is important because you can build stuff on it. And we're a very small country. And I've mentioned food security earlier. We're getting to a point where now every piece of available land, especially coastal, where we are, is being turned into a high-rise property. That can't happen. People need homes. I get it. But we also need to protect. We also need to protect our environment. Mm-hmm. And I want to be part of protecting Jamaica's incredible. If you've never been to Jamaica, trust me, this is one of the most beautiful little countries in the world. It goes from almost like deserts to tropical rainforests. It is so many, as I said, microclimates. It's so many different terroirs within a very small space. This is my ancestral home, and I will do what I have to make sure that it continues for future generations. It sounds very bold, and I don't have enough money to be able to make that happen on my own, but I'll do the best I can.
Listening to your story as an outsider, and if this is off base, say so, is there any way in which you mentioned cocoa originally was a slavery era crop and was continued to use as a tool of exploitation for so long? Is there any way in which doing this now is kind of giving your family back their story, kind of redeeming this thing?
Yeah, I wouldn't say. I would say what redeeming cocoa. The crop never did anything wrong, right? It's taking back the power. It's about who gets the value. I was thinking about this earlier on in a very random way. I was thinking about jazz. I was thinking about house music. House music was born out of repression towards the gay community in the northern states, right? Safe spaces. And then it gets co-opted and all of the money goes out and all of these original people are gone, right? The same thing happens with commodities. So it's a story that just gets repeated over and over again. And I think anything which corrects the history, I think is important. I like doing that. I like, it's important to do that. It's not fair. So yeah, I challenge it. And the weird thing is you know, if you're being cynical, you can use it as a business model. And why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't you take back something which is part of your story?
You can find out more about One One Cacao and order their bars at the link in the show notes. Let me know what you think of our conversation, and please leave a review of our podcast on your preferred listening platform, and tell your friends about the show so more people can find us and join this conversation. Thanks to Nick for coming on the show today, and to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.